The story begins with the mixed martial arts fighter Keys, who is fighting his opponent in the ring. Keys was in control of his opponent the whole time and had him beaten in front of everyone. His coach asked him not to win the match quickly so that the audience could watch more, but Keys didn't listen to him because he caught his opponent in a deadly submission move and made him tap out in seconds. Of course, the coach lost his temper and left the ring. Keys took his gear and left alone, but by chance, he bumped into Brody James, Keys' old friend who had turned professional and became the world champion in martial arts. Brody told Keys to meet him at a nightclub in a few hours. Keys indeed headed to the nightclub to meet James, and as soon as he sat down to talk with him, James said he would enter a fight against the Russian giant, Keys or Braga, to win $2 million. Keys warned him that Braga was using steroids, but James didn't listen. At this moment, Misha, James's manager, asked him to keep an eye on his friend because he hadn't been training like before. He promised her he would take care of him. When Keys was heading home, he noticed two thugs who looked suspicious. These thugs wanted to take advantage of James being drunk to attack and embarrass him, but Keys caught them and beat them up. The next morning, James told Keys that he would travel to Thailand to train for the fight and needed him with him. Keys agreed because he was a good friend and would never leave his buddy alone. James said goodbye to his wife and kids sadly, while Keys arrived in Thailand by plane. After a long journey, he finally managed to get into his room to rest from the trip. At that time, Hyogo, the president of the Mixed Martial Arts Federation, held a press conference featuring Keys or Braga, the biggest fighter in the world and Keys' rival. During the conference, one of the journalists insulted Braga because his wife had filed for divorce. Braga lost his temper and started breaking everything like a madman. Meanwhile, James was scared because he was going to fight a monstrous beast, while Keys wandered the streets of Thailand all day until he reached the gym where James was training. There, he met Matt Rams, James's coach. At first, Matt ignored Keys and refused to train with him, but Keys ignored him back and took a deserted corner in the gym. After that, he collected bottles and wood from the trash until he made his own special training equipment. Of course, the young guys in the gym mocked Keys and thought he was crazy, but he ignored them and continued training. Here, we meet Cobra, a young fighter known for his incredible strength. After he defeated his opponent, he asked to train with Keys to see his true power. When Keys refused, Cobra wanted to fight him, but suddenly James appeared and told everyone that Keys was his dear friend and they should respect him. Keys was annoyed with James because he was careless in his training and his diet wasn't right. James told him not to worry because he was a professional. Meanwhile, Cobra insisted on his idea to fight Keys until Keys finally agreed, and they prepared for the fight. The battle between Cobra and Keys took place in a steel cage. Although Keys was older than Cobra, he had amazing experience in mixed martial arts and was able to catch him and beat him in front of everyone until he broke his bone and knocked him unconscious. In the end, Cobra went to the hospital to treat his injuries, and James praised Keys for his incredible strength. The next morning, Keys jogged all the way to maintain his fitness. As soon as he arrived at the martial arts gym, he was upset because James arrived 2 hours late and was inconsistent with his training. Even his coach, Matt Raymonds, argued with him. In the end, James listened and started to train with Keys, but suddenly, Hyogo, the president of the Martial Arts Federation, appeared. Hyogo was talking to James about a match against Braga, but when he spotted Keys from a distance, he was greatly surprised and offered Keys a fight contract for $1,000 because he knew his true power. However, Keys refused because the fighters in Hyogo's federation used steroids. Then, Hyogo and the effect of Keys' refusal led to a smart move where Keys challenged one of the young guys in the gym to a fight. After that, it seemed like he was losing and unable to defend himself, so that Hyogo would think he was weak and leave him alone. Keys' plan succeeded, and Hyogo left the gym, while James was upset with him for refusing Hyogo's offer. Keys said that Hyogo was a coward and walked away from him. While Keys was training alone, two young guys asked him to train with them. At first, he wanted to refuse, but he eventually agreed because the two were persistent, and it was clear they were decent guys. At night, when everyone left the gym, Keys trained with the two young guys privately and taught them some of his secret fighting techniques so they could deliver devastating punches. The next morning, we learned that James felt anxious about his fight against Braga because he asked his coach, Matt, for help. However, he gathered his courage and told the reporters that he would hold Braga and beat him because he was the world champion in mixed martial arts. At this moment, one of the journalists noticed Keys from a distance and told his friend that Keys was a very strong fighter but ended up in prison unjustly, ruining his life before he could become famous. After a short while, Misha, James's manager, approached James and said she wanted to know Keys' entire story because Hyogo, the head of the Fight Federation, respected him and the journalists held him in high regard. Keys agreed to talk with her as soon as possible, but he faced problems finding clothes that fit him in Thailand due to his huge muscles, and he had to ask the young guys he was training for help. In the end, Keys prepared himself, and while he was buying flowers, he was surprised to see a little girl and learned she was Misha's daughter. He welcomed both of them. Misha told Keys that her husband had died 3 years ago and that she had to raise her daughter alone. Keys also started telling her his story, explaining that he was supposed to be a professional fighter but went to prison unjustly, and his life was completely ruined. At this point, Misha asked Keys why he went to prison. Keys felt anger when he remembered his past and walked away without saying anything. During this time, Hyogo met with James and his coach and then asked James to take steroids so he could defeat the beast, Braga. James agreed to his request, even though his coach, Matt, said that steroids were dangerous and could harm him. The next day, while James was training, he asked to fight Keys to test his skills. Keys agreed to his request but was surprised that James was very fierce and attacked him as if they were in a real match. From the start, James controlled the fight because he caught Keys off guard, but over time, Keys came back because James was too aggressive and unfocused until he completely took control and defeated him in front of everyone. James got angry, and of course, Keys was shocked and didn't know that James was taking steroids, which made him very aggressive. As soon as Hyogo learned that Keys had beaten James in training, he asked his assistant to spy on him and gather information about him. Keys continued to train the young guys he met at the gym to make them strong fighters. However, he was surprised when Misha showed up and apologized for asking him about his past in prison. Keys accepted her apology. Shortly after that, he learned that James was secretly taking steroids and asked to speak with her privately to resolve their issues. James agreed, and the two went out for dinner. Initially, Keys told James to withdraw from the match against Braga, but James refused, saying he had to take steroids to defeat that beast and that he would never withdraw. Keys decided to help his friend no matter the cost. The next day, James gathered Keys and his coach, Matt, and asked them to work together to prepare him for his fight against the Russian monster, Braga. Indeed, James was hit in training and started to regain his old strength because he was the world champion in mixed martial arts and no one could stop him. After the training ended, Keys and Misha convinced James to get treatment and stop taking steroids entirely for his health. As soon as James agreed to it, Keys thanked Misha for standing by him. The next morning, Keys was preparing breakfast when he was surprised that Hyogo's assistant, the director of the Martial Arts Federation, showed up and handed him a professional contract valued at $1 million. Keys completely refused it because Hyogo was greedy and only cared about money. After a short while, one of the young guys he trained gave the contract back to Hyogo. Hyogo exploded with anger because Keys rejected him and decided that he had to take revenge on him by any means possible. When James and Keys were training against each other, they decided to return to the gym, but they were surprised to find all the young guys gathered watching an old video of Keys fighting the police. Of course, Hyogo, the coward, was the one who leaked that video to embarrass Keys, but people admired his outstanding fighting skills, and he became very famous. So much so that when he left his house, journalists surrounded him from every direction. Luckily, Misha appeared at the last moment and rescued him from them. Misha brought Keys to a house far from the press and asked him to spend the rest of the day there until things calmed down. Keys thanked her for the help, but when he first entered the gym, he was shocked to see James training with a strange man. Even Matt had never seen that man before. At that moment, there was a surprise. James had broken his leg while training and began to scream in pain. Keys and Matt took him to the hospital as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, James suffered a new injury and had to withdraw from his match against Braga. Keys felt sad and decided to return to his country. But he was surprised when Hyogo showed up and told him that he would fight the Russian giant Braga instead of James for $2 million. Keys hated Hyogo and didn't want to work with him, but he agreed this time because the amount of money was huge. The match was organized, and the news spread widely. When Keys attended the gym to watch, everyone cheered for him and celebrated. However, one of the young guys who had been training under him was upset with him for changing his mind and accepting Hyogo's offer. Here, we learn that Keys had always been watching the man who injured James until he took a metal rod and broke his locker. Then he searched his phone and discovered that Hyogo had paid him money to intentionally break James's leg and force Keys to follow Hyogo's system. Keys exposed him to everyone and made him surrender so the police could arrest him. The next day, Keys informed all his friends. James said he had to defeat Braga by any means necessary and make Hyogo lose all his money to take revenge for his actions. Keys trained all night and day to improve his physical fitness and get ready for the fight against the Russian giant, Braga, until he became a destructive fighter. No one could stand in his way. Even James admired his incredible skills and gave him some tips to completely destroy Braga. After a short while, the match between Keys and Braga finally began. Hyogo was ecstatic because his assistant said they sold tickets for more than $1 million. Meanwhile, Keys was standing alone when, by coincidence, the global martial arts professional Tony Jaa appeared and greeted him happily because he saw Keys' video fighting the police. Minutes before the match, Keys kept thinking about how to make Hyogo lose all his money because of what he had done until a very smart idea came to him. He went to provoke Braga outside the ring. At first, Braga ignored Keys, but when Keys mentioned his wife, who had filed for divorce, Braga exploded with rage and attacked him fiercely. At the start of the fight, Braga completely dominated Keys because he was bigger in size. He smashed Keys onto the table as if he were a small child. Even though Keys had more experience in martial arts, he was shocked by Braga's strength and incredible speed. Unfortunately, Braga wiped the floor with Keys and was about to knock him out completely. However, Keys gathered his strength again and used a secret karate fighting technique to break one of Braga's ribs. After Braga's rib was broken, he couldn't stand until Keys delivered a kick that knocked him out completely. At this moment, Hyogo appeared and said, "I will sue you for millions of dollars." Keys replied, "I have evidence that you intentionally broke James's leg, and I have recordings that can expose you." Hyogo got scared and left him alone. After winning, Keys congratulated all his friends and praised James for his bravery, thanking him for standing by him in tough times. They all left the ring, and the crowd cheered loudly.